Park Street. Up to the time I came to this little road, I heard this big roar blast. We got a dynamite check to the west there. I thought I'd investigate maybe. I thought maybe blowed up. So I started up there real fast. Halfway to it, I stuck my head out the window, out of the car, and I seen this white egg object. I didn't know what it was at that time. I thought it was a vehicle that turned over. I started out real fast so I could maybe help the people in the car. I went up to it close, about 200 feet. I was 200 feet from it. I got out the car and started toward it when I heard this big noise again, same noise, and the flame coming from under it. I got scared and started running back. I ran about 50 feet from it. I pulled myself to the ground to hide. Afterwards, I didn't hear the noise no more. I just lifted up my head to see what was happening. It was real quiet then, and I saw this white object just take off toward the west there, smooth out.
Did it leave any kind of a vapor trail when it took off?
No, sir, it didn't. Just quiet, no trail, no nothing.
But it did make a roar at the time you approached it.
A big roar, yes, sir, it did.
And you could actually see the flame in under it?
Yes, sir, I did.
Was it standing on legs?
Yes, sir, it legs. I call it legs, yes.
And you thought there were 4 of these?
Apparently there was on the markings on the ground. It was 4 legs, yes.
In other words, you examined it later on?
Yes, we did. Me and State Police, New Mexico State Police.
After it took off, did you go back to get help?
No, I radioed help from the car, and he came on out, yes.
I see. And when you went back to examine it, what did you find near where it had been parked?
Well, the bush, a bush is there around there, greasewood and grass was still burning. So, and I saw his markings on the ground, prints and everything else.
There were prints as if it had been standing on these legs.
Right.
Did the legs go up into the object when it took off? Did you notice that?
No, sir, I didn't notice it was fast.
And after it got into the air, did the roar stop?
Yes, sir, when it came straight up.
Ray Stanford speaking. I'm at the office of the Defensor Chieftain in Socorro, New Mexico. I have just talked to a gentleman here who was on the site Saturday morning, some hours after the occurrence, while the imprints were still very clear. And I want to ask him some questions. I wonder if he could tell us his name first.
Louis Reidel. I'm publisher of the L. Defensor Chieftain.
Regarding what was seen by you at the site, did you see the indentations or tracks while they were still very fresh?
Yeah, I was there early the next morning, and that was Saturday morning, and before hundreds of people had gotten a chance to obliterate all the tracks.
What was your impression of these tracks? Do you think they were made by a heavy object, or by a light object, or by digging out, or what?
I would say a heavy object coming down very slowly and made a 4 or 5 inch depression in comparatively hard sand there in the draw.
And these were longer than they were wide?
About 12, I would guess, about 12 inches long and 3 or 4 inches wide.
And equally deep, perhaps running to the center in a wedge. Was that the description that was accurate on this that I've heard?
Well, probably a little deeper on the south side. I mean, the north side of the way it landed. From his description, the front of the plane, or the object, I'll put it that way, was facing south. And the way it landed on uneven ground, there seems to be a heavy indentions on the south side, which indicates that more of the weight was there.
Yes, this would be logical to me because, as I recall from being there this morning, the south side is downhill. I mean, it kind of slants upward to the north, so there might actually be more weight on the south side if there were an object balancing, sitting on these legs. Was this your observation too?
Yes.
Now here there were two little indentations off to one side, to the west side, sort of parallel with with one of the lines made by two of the four legs. Did you see these two indentations yourself?
Yes, I did. Someone in the crowd, well, it was only four of us, one of them made a remark that they possibly footprints, or if you want to describe it, more of a hoof print, but that wasn't the impression that I had then. We decided in our story, in our newspaper, that we wouldn't go into that too deeply. It sounded a little preposterous.
I see. How close were these to the line formed by the two nearest footprints, we'll call them, left by the object, leg prints? How close were they to the line made by the two nearest footprints?
Well, they were practically in the center between the two indentions made by the legs on the west side.
Yes.
And they probably 36 inches, about a yard.
Were they in parallel with that line made by the two legs?
No, they were, yes, they were parallel, I'm sorry.
Yes. Now, we won't speculate as to what these were. I was wondering, it was on the same side that Zamora told me that he had seen some figures from a distance in white coveralls. Did he tell you about these figures?
Yes. Yes, they were on the same side, those indentions in the ground, the round hole, indentions.
Talking to Dr. Hynek, he implied that Zamora told him nothing specific at all about seeing any men, implied he hadn't even mentioned any men. He later seemed to come down and say that he mentioned coveralls after very pointed questioning by one of the persons who was present. But did, in this talk with Zamora, soon after the sighting, since you were one of the first to be there, did he mention to you that he actually saw men or just coveralls?
He very definitely did. He said there were two there. Now, he didn't say anything about them being men, but you naturally think so, because he said that when he was still in the car, that one of them, both men or objects, had their back to him, and one of them turned around and looked him squarely in the face. That was his exact words. And he very definitely said that he saw two men there at the object. And he said that immediately they disappeared and apparently got in the plane from the side, from the west side, and the plane lifted up and started off.
That's an interesting thing. I just noticed from the west side, this is fairly speculative, but if they got in on the west side, were you seeing these two circular indentations at the west side?
Yes, that's right. And
would you say these were at a position where, with speculation, we might think it could have been some stairs that had been folded down, that had touched down there? Did this look like it could have been this to you?
Yeah, it's possible. I thought that later when I got to thinking about it, and you don't ordinarily think of men with hoofs or anything like that, so I presumed that. But the remarkable part of it is that there was no other tracks there.
Yes. I could think that if the men were small and childlike, as one report said, did he tell you that they were childlike?
Yeah, well, that was his description telling us that they were small. That's the way he was.
I would think if they were that small, maybe overnight their footprints might have been destroyed by a little breeze or something.
Well, they could have.
The heavier ones would have remained a little more. So, well, it's only speculation, but maybe these things were associated with a ladder of some sort. At least this might give us a reason of why they were on the west side of the object, since we know that, according to Zamora's report, this is where the men disappeared into the object. It was on the west side. Now, Would you say that Zamora was still rather excited Saturday morning when you were there?
No, he's gotten over that part of it.
Zamora impressed me as a very calm and level-headed sort of fellow, not subject to imaginative spells or hallucinations. Would this be your impression of him, and from the people's knowledge of him here in town, would you say this seems to be a general impression?
Very definitely.
Good. Well, I think that this will help me out in getting the details of this case on record, since I may not have time to talk to all of these things with Mr. Zamora, who's been bothered a lot by everyone questioning him and calling him on the telephone, and I certainly need your help.
Well, that tourist came up here and wanted gasoline. He come from the south, and he said, your aircraft around here flies awfully low. I said, well, how was that, sir? He said, well, it like knocked me off the road out there. He said, it must have been in trouble, so the policeman was going to it. So I asked him, was it the helicopter? He said, no. He said, if it was, it's a funny-looking one. So he went on about his affairs, and I was making up the bank deposits for the bank at 15 to 6, and that was the same time he was here. And the next morning, well, it dawned on me that the time element was the same time that the tourist was in here, that Zamora went to that object that was on the ground there. And I called the radio station, told him Zamora was not telling a lie, because the tourist seen something and didn't think much of it. And he saw the policeman also going to the object that was on the ground, which was a UFO.
This is Walter Schroed, your roving reporter at KSRC Radio in Socorro, New Mexico. We have with us this afternoon Mr. Lonnie Zamora, the Socorro patrolman that while chasing a car found himself in an area about 2 miles west of Socorro and 1 mile east of KSRC radio station, at which time he reports he came upon an unidentified object resting on 4 legs. That as he drew closer, the object took off with a loud roar spouting blue, red flame and disappeared in the sky. A great number of cars and Socorro people have gathered here in front of the studios of KSRC to catch a glimpse of Mr. Zamora as he arrived and welcome him with their car horns. Mr. Zamora, after coming upon this object, just what did happen?
I went up that little road for about half a mile, I guess. Came up to this little barking deal there on the side of the road, and I sort of glanced out of the window, looked to my left, and seen this white object on the ground. So I thought it might be a car that had turned over. So I was the real big Harry going out there to investigate, thought maybe somebody would be hurt. That time I saw this white egg-shaped looking object.
It looked something like an egg, you mean?
Yeah, from the distance I was, it looked like an egg to me.
About the size of a car, I think someone said.
Yes, sir, it looked like a car had turned over. That's why I say it's the size of a car.
And did it have any kind of markings on it of any kind that you noticed?
Yes, it did. Not from that far, I didn't see the markings. When I went up closer to it, I did see the markings.
And someone said that the markings, as you saw it, was an upside-down V with 3 lines running through it.
No, sir, I couldn't tell you that because they still don't want me to say nothing about the markings.
They don't want you to say anything about the markings. All right, we won't question you on that. And if we run into an area that they don't want you to talk about, well, you just say so. And this happened about 5:30 Friday afternoon.
It happened about 5:50, about 10 minutes to 6.
About 10 minutes to 6. And you did place a call in to Sergeant Tavis of the state police to come on out and help you with the investigation.
As soon as I saw this object, I didn't know what it was. I placed a call to Sergeant Tavis of the state police. Told him if he would come out there and help me on this. He said, yes, I'll be right there in about a few minutes.
And he arrived just about 2 or 3 minutes after the object had taken off and left.
Well, the object was still about a couple of months up there whenever he arrived.
It was still, that's the direction it went. It went over the top of the mountain. And we've heard several reports that it flew low, like it was dragging something, and we've heard some...
It was very low to the ground. At the time I was seeing it, it was very low to the ground, up to the perlite mill there, and then it started gaining altitude.
Now, also, it was reported to me that when you first drove up into this area and sighted this object, that the motors were running and it was going bzzz, 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 or some such sound as that. Is that correct?
I couldn't say because it happened so fast. I started running. I was scared.
Well, I don't blame you. The thought of it even scares me yet. Now, you did say that you saw two what appeared to be people dressed in white uniforms with, did they have helmets on like spacemen or anything?
No, sir, I wouldn't say they were people. I saw something white coverall. That's what I could say.
They looked like there was something in white coverall.
Right.
But you couldn't identify them as actually being a human being as you and I are.
No, sir, okay.
But you didn't know whether they turned and saw you or what then?
Well, I would say that this white object turned and saw me.
Were they two of them?
I would say there were two because one was in front and the other object was in back.
Did you have a chance to notice what kind of a doorway they had to this object, this flying object?
Didn't notice any doors, no.
And when it took off, it made a loud roaring sound. Is that
the very loud noise, roar sound.
And then after it got up in the air about 20 feet, well, the sound seemed to disappear.
The sound was disappeared and was very, very quiet. You could hear a pin drop there.
And now the markings it left on the ground. Now, the reports that I have had, and I haven't had a chance to go and take a look, and the winds yesterday have probably spoiled a lot of that anyway, was that there were deep indentations in the ground, approximately 10 inches wide and 6 to 8 inches deep, about 15 feet apart. Is that a correct report?
Well, I would say it was about 19 feet apart of the prints.
And were there any other prints, like footprints around the area right after the takeoff or when you were making the investigation?
There were some prints, but I wouldn't know if there were footprints or anything, just prints, I would say.
You couldn't identify them as actually being a footprint, just indentations like maybe somebody might have walked there or something might have walked there.
Somebody walked around there because when I got there was nobody around there yet.
Now, there was, according to a report on one of the news, the television stations in Albuquerque, claimed that they had a call just about 5:30 in Albuquerque of a sighting of a flying object flying in this direction. Did you hear anything about that?
No, sir, I didn't.
Which, if that be true, means that someone in Albuquerque saw this object flying in this direction just prior to your sighting it. And which corroborates the fact that there was something here. Now, it's the feeling, I get the feeling, at least, Lonnie, of the people that I've talked to and they were out in the area, that they are quite sure that something landed there and something took off from this spot because of not only the imprints that is left in the ground, but the fires that it started and the method of which the fire or the power that it was, whatever it was using, kind of spread itself as it took off. Is that right?
Right. I know there was something out there because I seen it.
And what was your immediate reaction as soon as you realized that this thing might be an object from outer space?
Well, I didn't think it would be an object from outer space because I don't believe in things like this from outer space.
Well, it was something that you had never seen before, and it was enough to scare you to run in the other direction.
Well, what scared me was a loud noise in the flame that it had under it.
It had a large flame then as it took off. Was it a yellow flame? Or
it was a bluish, orange flame. I thought this object was going to blow up. That's why I started running back.
And did you notice whether these arms that it was sitting on retracted back into the object as it flew away or not? You didn't have time. And so I just running in the other direction at that time. I would have done too. Are there any other things about this sighting that you think our listening audience might be interested in, or something that you'll be allowed to tell us?
No, that's all I saw.
And Did it disappear into the high sky after it got over around the perlite, or just
Yes, sir. It flew low to the perlite mine. Then from there on, it just so fast that you could barely view.
Right straight up in the air.
You have to be paying attention to what you were looking at to see what it was doing.
Uh-huh. Well, do you think we're going to get any more of them around here?
Hope not. Not immediately.
Well, it was quite an interesting experience, I'm sure, and it's caused an awful lot of comment. Did the investigators that were called in make any comments at all in one direction or the other, with the exception of that they do not have any such object in this area?
Oh, they're still puzzled themselves, yes.
And there's been no report on the samplings they took of the area around there from the burning brush and the area that the blast hit the ground. But if I give them a clue as to what kind of power was being used on this.
No, sir, no.
Uh-huh. Well, I think I've just about covered it here. Let's see. It wasn't dragging anything. We had a report that it was dragging something as it led.
No, I wouldn't say it was dragging nothing, just low to the ground.
And you can't think of anything else then about the sighting of this flying object that our listening audience might be interested in?
No, that's all I'll say now.
Well, Lonnie, I'm sure you've been getting an awful lot of questions and a lot of inquiry, and I imagine you're beginning to get a little tired of it, actually, for so many people calling and asking you about it. Maybe this will be one way to keep too many people from having you have to go through the story over and over again.
Right.
Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, Mr. Lonnie Zamora. This is the gentleman, the Socorro patrolman, that Friday at around 10 minutes to 6, come up on an object, a flying object, an unidentified flying object, as the government prefers to call them.
Excuse me, Walter, I got some military people at the service office want to talk to me now. I believe they're from UFO.
What you have is the military people that are here from UFO to talk to you right now and to ask you some more questions about this. And they have not in any way tried to indicate that they didn't want us to cover this type of a news.
No, sir, I just don't know if I was going to come here and talk to you on the radio station. Just go right.
Well, that's fine, and we would be interested in knowing what they think about it if they will allow it, and after you get through talking to them, if you would call us back here at KSRC and give us some of the information that they might allow you to let us broadcast.
We'll be glad to.
All right. And Mr. Zamora, I hope that you don't come upon any more of these objects unless we find out exactly what they are. So it's been a pleasure, Mr. Zamora, having you in our studios, and we want to thank you, and I know our listeners thank you, and this is expressed by the great number of cars that are out here in front of our studios just to get a glimpse of what we might call a Socorro celebrity right at the moment. Thank you again, Mr. Zamora. It's been very nice having you in our KSRC studios. You've just been listening to a KSRC radio special featuring an interview with Mr. Lonnie Zamora, the patrolman here in Socorro, that sighted a unidentified object that flew away when he drove up on it.
I certainly believe that Lonnie Zamora had a most interesting and significant experience, and I'm particularly interested in the tracks that were left and in the analysis of the samples of material from those tracks. And until you know more about it, all I can say, rather disappointingly to you perhaps, is simply that I'm as puzzled as you are.
If your findings on this, after you've run the analysis on the specimens that you've taken, would you be at liberty to advise the public to just what they were?
Yes, absolutely. There's no reason why not. I think in general, there's been a feeling that the Air Force wants to hide things. And this is, at least in my experience as consultant for them, I have not come across that. For instance, here's one example. I was called by the Pentagon this morning, and there's an Associated Press report out to the effect that some Air Force person had told Mr. Zamora not to say anything about the lettering.
And I was asked specifically to find out whether this statement had been made, who made it, and all that sort of thing. Zamora tells me that no one, Air Force or no one else, told him not to say anything about it. But this is how these rumors get started. Someone says the Air Force says clam up, and this was simply, apparently, not the case, according to Mr. Zamora. So I was very happy to find that out.
Well, now about this marking, could you tell us how he described the marking and what the marking was?
Yes, I see no reason why not. He described it to me as an inverted V with a sort of a bar across it. And as he described it and drew it, the thing I was reminded of is a typical brand you have, a cattle brand. As though whatever the instrument, whatever the device was, as though somebody had branded it as you might brand a cattle.
And about the color of this object, how did he describe the color?
Not in any great detail. The color was indicated as primarily whitish, and no specific markings other than the inverted V.